Isabella Grant thought her life was perfect until the day she discovered her husband, Henry, was having an affair. But the shocking truth didn't end there. As she unraveled the betrayal, she uncovered a devastating secret. Henry wasn't just unfaithful to her. He was also having an affair with her own mother, Eleanor Hart. What started as a painful heartbreak quickly spiraled into something far more sinister, leading Isabella to uncover a shocking crime that would destroy everything she knew about love, trust, and family. Isabella Grant's life was the kind most people could only dream of. She lived in a beautiful two-story home in a quiet, picturesque suburb with her husband, Henry, and their two children, Ava and Liam. Henry was a charismatic and successful real estate developer, known for his charm and persuasive demeanor. His career had allowed them to enjoy a comfortable lifestyle, complete with vacations abroad and a tight-knit social circle. Isabella, a part-time art teacher, balanced her time between nurturing her children and pursuing her passion for painting. To anyone looking in, they were the perfect family. Henry was the dedicated provider, Isabella the devoted wife, and their children the epitome of joy and innocence. Adding to this idyllic picture was Isabella's mother, Eleanor Hart, who often visited to help with the children or join them for family dinners. Eleanor, a widow in her late 50s, was graceful and poised, her warm demeanor endearing her to everyone she met. After the sudden death of Isabella's father a decade earlier, Eleanor had poured her energy into her family, particularly her daughter and grandchildren. She was a constant presence in their lives, a source of comfort, wisdom, and love. Life for Isabella followed a comforting routine. Weekdays were a blend of work, school drop-offs, and family dinners. Weekends were spent at the park or hosting barbecues with friends. On special occasions, Eleanor would join them, often cooking her signature dishes and sharing stories about Isabella's childhood. Isabella felt lucky to have her mother close, especially during moments when Henry's work demanded late nights or extended business trips. But as time went on, subtle shifts began to creep into this seemingly perfect life. Henry, who used to spend his evenings unwinding with Isabella and the children, started working late more frequently. He claimed he was under pressure to close deals or manage difficult clients, and Isabella, trusting and supportive, accepted his explanations. Kieran felt a jolt. Around the same time, Eleanor's presence became more sporadic. She started canceling plans at the last minute, citing unexpected commitments with her volunteer group or social obligations with friends. While Isabella initially brushed these changes aside, her intuition began to nag at her. There were other small signs that something wasn't quite right. Henry, once attentive and affectionate, seemed distracted. He'd glance at his phone more often during dinner, sometimes offering a vague excuse about work when Isabella caught him typing a message. Eleanor, too, began acting differently. Her once consistent warmth toward Isabella seemed tinged with a nervous energy, as though she was constantly guarding a secret. Despite these growing suspicions, Isabella told herself it was all in her head. Her life had always been steady and predictable. She couldn't imagine anything that might disturb its balance. But her unease persisted. Small moments, a lingering glance between Henry and Eleanor during a family gathering, or their shared laughter over a private joke, seemed to confirm her growing fears. As the weeks passed, Isabella began to notice patterns she couldn't ignore. Henry's late nights often coincided with Eleanor's bridge club meetings. There was an unspoken tension in the air whenever the three of them were together, subtle but undeniable. Isabella, who had always trusted her instincts, knew something was wrong. even if she didn't yet have the proof. Her perfect life, once so comforting and safe, now felt like a facade. She couldn't shake the feeling that everything she held dear was on the verge of unraveling, and deep down, she feared that when the truth finally surfaced, it would destroy her world. Isabella's suspicions gnawed at her, but she struggled to confront them directly. For weeks, she vacillated between doubt and denial, telling herself that she was overreacting. Yet, the small inconsistencies continued to pile up. Henry's late-night work meetings had become routine, and he always had a convenient explanation for why his phone seemed glued to his hand. Eleanor, too, had grown increasingly evasive. Her once predictable schedule now seemed filled with vague commitments, and she avoided questions about where she spent her evenings. The first crack came one morning as Isabella was tidying up Henry's home office. A drawer left slightly ajar caught her attention, and when she slid it open, she found an envelope tucked underneath a stack of papers. Curious, she opened it and froze. Inside was a handwritten note, unmistakably in Eleanor's elegant script. The message was brief but damning. "I can't stop thinking about you. Every moment together feels like heaven." It wasn't signed, but Isabella didn't need a signature. Her mother's handwriting was as familiar to her as her own. Her heart pounded as she tried to make sense of what she had just read. A cold wave of realization swept over her, but she still clung to the hope that there might be an innocent explanation. Perhaps the note was old, written to her late father, and had somehow ended up in Henry's possession. But deep down, she knew the truth was far darker. Over the next few days, Isabella became hyper-aware of Henry and Eleanor's behavior. She watched their interactions with a new lens, noticing things she had ignored before. The way Henry's face lit up when Eleanor entered the room, the subtle tension in their conversations, and the occasional fleeting touch that now seemed anything but accidental. Determined to find answers, Isabella began to dig deeper. She started checking Henry's phone when he wasn't looking, though she found little at first. His messages were innocuous, and his call log seemed ordinary. Frustrated but undeterred, she decided to hire a private investigator to uncover the truth. It was a drastic step, but Isabella felt she needed undeniable proof before she could confront her husband and mother. The investigator worked quickly, and within a week, Isabella had the answers she dreaded. A series of photographs showed Henry and Eleanor meeting at a boutique hotel in the city. The images were undeniable. Henry's arm draped casually around Eleanor's shoulders, the two of them laughing as they entered the hotel together. There were also emails exchanged between them, filled with declarations of love and promises to keep their relationship hidden. Isabella's world crumbled as she stared at the evidence. The betrayal was worse than anything she could have imagined. It wasn't just her husband's infidelity. It was the involvement of her mother, the one person she had always believed she could trust unconditionally. Though devastated, Isabella knew she couldn't stay silent. The weight of the secret was unbearable, and the lies had already infected every corner of her life. She realized she would have to confront them both, even if it meant tearing her family apart. The truth, no matter how painful, could no longer be ignored. The moment Isabella decided to confront Henry and Eleanor, her mind raced with fear and anticipation. She had spent sleepless nights rehearsing what she would say, knowing that nothing could prepare her for the devastation she was about to unleash. The evidence in her hands was irrefutable: photographs, emails, and a note written by her own mother. But nothing could soften the blow of betrayal. Now she wasn't sure who she was angrier with, Henry, the man she had shared her life with, or Eleanor, the woman who had been her rock for so many years. She called them both to the house for what she promised would be a family dinner, though she knew deep down it would be anything but. Henry arrived first, looking somewhat flustered as he stepped through the door. He always had a way of smoothing over awkward moments with his charm, but tonight he seemed unusually tense. Isabella could see that he had no idea what was coming, though she had no doubt that Eleanor had likely suspected. Isabella didn't wait long before the doorbell rang again. It was Eleanor, her mother's serene face betraying none of the turmoil Isabella had been battling within herself for weeks. Once they were all seated at the table, Isabella pushed her plate aside, her stomach a storm of anxiety. She pulled the envelope from her bag and slid it across the table toward them. Her hands shook slightly as she spoke. "I know about the affair." Henry's eyes widened in shock, but there was a flicker of guilt that quickly flashed across his face. He immediately tried to deny it, claiming that the note was a misunderstanding, that it was from years ago, or that Eleanor had written it by mistake. But Isabella didn't let him finish. "Don't lie to me, Henry," she snapped, her voice trembling. "I have the photographs, the emails. You think I wouldn't notice what's been happening under my own roof?" Eleanor, sitting in silence beside Henry, remained composed at first, but Isabella could see her mother's eyes welling with tears as the reality of the confrontation sank in. "It just happened," Eleanor finally whispered, her voice barely audible. She looked at Henry, who reached out to grasp her hand. "We didn't plan this. It was something that grew over time. I never wanted to hurt you, Isabella. I'm so sorry." The words felt hollow to Isabella. Her heart shattered as she watched her mother, the person who had been her constant support, speak of betrayal as if it were some unfortunate accident. "You've known for months, haven't you?" Isabella asked, her voice rising with a mix of anger and disbelief. "You've been lying to me, living in my house, playing the doting grandmother while having an affair with my husband?" Henry tried to intervene, defending Eleanor and claiming he had been overwhelmed by stress. He blamed the pressure of his work for making him seek comfort elsewhere. But Isabella wasn't listening anymore. She had long since stopped believing his excuses. What stung the most was how they had both betrayed her trust in such a cruel and calculated way. How Henry had dwarfed her husband to force her to have children, who violated her husband's rights. The tension in the room grew unbearable. Isabella's chest tightened as she realized that the family she thought she had known was nothing more than a facade. She had spent so many years building a life with Henry, investing her love and trust in him, while Eleanor had always been the one she turned to for advice, comfort, and guidance. To see them together, this man she had called her partner, and this woman she had relied on, was too much to bear. "Leave," Isabella finally said, her voice breaking as she stood up from the table. "Both of you. I don't want to see either of you again." Eleanor's face crumpled as she reached out, but Isabella stepped back, too hurt to embrace the woman who had been a second mother to her. Henry stood up too, his expression one of frustration, but he didn't argue. There was no excuse left for him to make. Without another word, they left, their departure marking the end of Isabella's marriage and the shattering of her relationship with her mother. As the door closed behind them, Isabella collapsed onto the couch, her body racked with sobs. The life she had once known, the life she had so carefully crafted, was gone, taken from her by the two people she had loved and trusted most. Just as Isabella was beginning to adjust to the reality of her broken family, another shockwave hit her life. The days following her confrontation with Henry and Eleanor were filled with a whirlwind of emotions. Anger, sadness, disbelief, and, above all, a deep sense of betrayal. Henry had moved out of the house, and though Isabella felt a sense of relief, she couldn't escape the gnawing feeling that the worst was yet to come. The pain of losing not only her husband but her mother too had left her reeling, but she focused on what mattered most: her children. Ava and Liam, still young and unaware of the turmoil surrounding them, became her sole reason to push through the darkness. But as the weeks passed, Isabella's life took another dark turn. She received a call one evening that shattered what little peace she had left. It was the police. Eleanor was dead. The news hit like a physical blow. Isabella's mind couldn't process it. Her first instinct was disbelief. Eleanor had always been healthy, active, and vibrant. What could have happened to her? The officers explained that Eleanor had been found lifeless in her home, with no signs of struggle or injury. They suspected foul play, though the cause of death was unclear at the time. Isabella's immediate reaction was shock, quickly followed by a sense of dread. Though she tried to push the thought from her mind, one question lingered. Was Henry involved? It wasn't just the affair that made her suspicious. It was the strange timing of it all. Henry's relationship with Eleanor had been strained since their secret came to light. Could his anger and frustration have escalated to something much darker? As the investigation unfolded, the police discovered that Eleanor had been poisoned. The autopsy confirmed it. There was a lethal dose of a rare toxin in her system, one that would take hours to show symptoms and could easily be administered without detection. The authorities focused their efforts on Henry, who was the last person known to have been with Eleanor. What they uncovered next left Isabella reeling. Henry had been in serious financial trouble for months, and it turned out that he had been embezzling money from his company. More chillingly, the investigation revealed that just days before Eleanor's death, Henry had taken out a large life insurance policy on her. The motive was clear. If Eleanor died, he would receive a significant payout that would cover his mounting debts. The police dug deeper into Henry's actions in the weeks leading up to the murder. Surveillance footage from the neighborhood showed Henry entering Eleanor's home on the night she died. He had stayed for several hours, and the security cameras also captured him leaving in the early hours of the morning. The timeline matched up with the toxicology report, confirming that Eleanor had died in that time frame. Though there was no direct evidence linking Henry to the poisoning, the circumstantial evidence was overwhelming. Isabella felt a mix of horror and disgust as the pieces of the puzzle fell into place. Henry had not only betrayed her with Eleanor, but now it seemed he had killed the woman who had once been her closest confidant. The arrest came swiftly. Henry was charged with first-degree murder, the evidence stacked against him too damning to ignore. Isabella was left in a haze of confusion and grief. The man she had once loved, the man she had built a life with, was now accused of taking the life of her mother. How had everything gone so terribly wrong? As the trial loomed on the horizon, Isabella struggled to make sense of it all. The loss of her marriage, the betrayal of her mother, and now the murder. Her life had become a twisted nightmare. Yet, she knew one thing for sure. She would never let Henry or anyone else destroy what little was left of her family. Her children needed her more than ever, and she would see this through no matter the cost. The trial was a long, drawn-out affair that seemed to drag on for eternity. As the days passed, Isabella found herself consumed with the relentless pursuit of justice for Eleanor. It was a surreal experience, sitting in the courtroom, watching Henry, the man who had once been her husband, stand accused of her mother's murder. He looked nothing like the man she had once known, now a hollow version of himself, his once confident demeanor replaced with a mixture of arrogance and desperation. His eyes would occasionally meet hers, but she never saw remorse in them, only a cold, calculated self-preservation. The prosecution laid out the case against him step by step, detailing the financial motive, the life insurance policy, and the damning surveillance footage that showed Henry entering Eleanor's home the night she died. The investigators spoke of the rare toxin found in Eleanor's system, one that could only have been administered by someone with a specific knowledge of poison. But it was the email exchanges between Henry and Eleanor, full of cryptic messages and declarations of love, that sealed the case. These communications showed a relationship that had escalated beyond an affair. It was a dangerous, obsessive bond, one that Henry seemed to have been willing to do anything to protect. Isabella sat in the gallery each day, her mind racing with questions. How had it all come to this? The man who had once promised to cherish her had killed the woman who had been her rock, her mother. The grief she had felt for her own broken marriage had only intensified with the realization that Eleanor's death wasn't an accident or a natural occurrence. It was a calculated act of betrayal. And yet, despite the overwhelming evidence, Henry's defense team continued to fight for his innocence, claiming that the prosecution's case was based on circumstantial evidence and that there was no direct proof that he had poisoned Eleanor. As the trial neared its end, Isabella began to feel the weight of the decision that would soon be in the hands of the jury. The burden of justice, of bringing her mother's killer to account, was almost too much to bear. She couldn't shake the image of her mother's lifeless body, the woman who had been taken from her in the most horrific way imaginable. And yet there was another part of her that longed for closure, to finally put an end to the torment that had haunted her since the day Eleanor had died. When the jury returned with their verdict, Isabella's heart pounded in her chest. Henry was found guilty of first-degree murder, the evidence against him too compelling to ignore. The courtroom fell into a hushed silence as the judge sentenced him to life in prison, without the possibility of parole. Isabella couldn't help but feel a flicker of satisfaction, but it was quickly replaced by a deep, aching emptiness. Justice had been served, but nothing could bring Eleanor back. In the aftermath of the trial, Isabella struggled to find peace. The loss of her mother, the betrayal by her husband, and the tragedy that had unfolded were still fresh in her mind, the scars of the past never far from the surface. But as the years passed, she began to rebuild her life, focusing on her children and her own healing. The pain of what had happened would never fully disappear, but Isabella found solace in the knowledge that she had fought for the truth, for her mother, and for herself. She was determined to teach her children the value of love and trust, even if it meant carrying the weight of the past with her every day. The tragedy that had shattered her world became a cautionary tale, one that served as a grim reminder of how easily secrets and lies could destroy everything. Isabella had lost so much: her marriage, her mother, the life she had once known. But she had also gained strength and resilience in the face of unimaginable loss. And in the end, it was that strength that would carry her forward, toward a future where, perhaps, she could find some semblance of peace.